If you change the way you do rack pulls, you'll get more athletic while getting tremendous carryover to pulls from the ground. See, it all starts with the starting position. It must be below the knee for optimal transference. That is how you mimic or closely resemble the joint angles of deeper pulls, while overloading the glutes, hamstrings, and spinal erectors in a specific way. Usually what we have is a slight partial pull with weights that are not too excessive. Therefore, the fatigue is not a major factor. This makes it a great tool for volume training, though you can technically max out and use high-intensity strategies with rack pulls as well. Regardless, if you get stronger below the knee rack pulls, you should automatically be a strong deadlifter, even if you never did that exercise. I would say if you can do 700 in the rack, you'll easily be able to do 585 and more from the ground. And if you can't, that's because the pin height is not proper. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. But remember, this is not above the knee. That is a completely different exercise. And as I've been saying for the last 4 years now, it will not give you carryover. If that's what you're doing it for, you're wasting your time. That may be good for the upper traps due to the way to stretch and grip if you're doing it strapless. But you're pretty much all the way upright and you're not getting that proper hip hinge in. So that must be factored in. The reason why guys don't get carryover is because they're pulling from the wrong position, even if it's below the knee. And that'll bring me on to my second point, which will ensure that you're getting what you want out of this movement. There's an amazing trick that Louis Simmons discovered through decades of coaching his athletes. He found that if the rack pull was not 100 pounds more than the deadlift, or just pull from the ground, carryover will be there. In other words, that is how you will determine the pulling position, the max height that you should be doing, unless it's progressive range of motion. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a rack with 1 inch hole space apart, and you can do 700 from pin 6, but then from the ground, you can only pull 500. That means you probably shouldn't mess with pin 6. Try pin 5 or pin 4, or maybe even pin 3. There will be a range for you. Because the thing is, everyone has their own individual weaknesses and specific leverages. I'll say that as a general rule, the shorter you are, the lower the rack height must be. For some, that can be as low as 0.5 inches to 3 being the max. For taller guys, you might be able to get away with the 4 or 5 inches. All depends on your build, but remember, this is 100% auto-regulated based off the deadlift to rack pull ratio. As long as you're not doing 100 pounds more, you don't have to worry about transference. And you'll still build all the correct muscles in a specific way. Which means that if you could do 600 on a below the knee rack pull, your classic deadlift should be a minimum of 500. If not, you need to swap out that rack pull height. And that's what will determine the variations that need to be rotated through. So this rule is not set in stone. There's nothing wrong with the higher positions if you're just doing it for that. But if you want optimal carryover, stick to this and you'll be good. So my next advice, which will benefit all athletes or people who simply want to get stronger, is to use accommodating resistance on rack pulls and deadlifts. This means the usage of bands and chains. Why? Because it reduces bar deceleration while providing the partial benefits of the rack pull in a full range of motion exercise. Or if you're doing a rack pull already, it'll be heavier at the top. So the overload that you would normally get from, say, doing an above the knee rack pull or simply at the knee, or just the higher positions in general, can now be acquired through a deeper range of motion exercise. So we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And this gives us the perfect environment to do speed pulls, which will greatly improve your deadlift and rack pull strength. I'd recommend that you do some 3-week waves of 50, 55, 60 with the bands or chains. Then you rotate the variations. 15 to 20 sets of 1 will blow up your pulling strength and make you extremely explosive. Lots of professional athletes are training in this way. You're in an intermediate zone, getting a lot of quality singles in, so fatigue is not really an issue. You don't get the form breakdown. You get to work on that technique, overload certain parts of the range of motion, change the strength curve, and even prevent overuse and plateaus, because that's ultimately what these variations do. Like, you don't have to do 5x5 deadlifts or rack pulls. Speed pulls will take care of you in that way. And then you can use accessories on the side to hypertrophy your weak links. So you can do 20 sets of 1 on a speed pull, then right after you're doing a 3 sets of 10 good morning. And that'll cover you. That'll give you the carryover. See what I'm saying? Speed pulls are very beneficial, and they can definitely be done in the rack. If you do below the knee, especially like in the super low positions, say 1-2 inches above the ground, it'll do wonders. And you just get so many options by doing this. Like, you can do a wave where you're pulling from the ground conventional, another wave where it's sumo, and then the other wave's done in the rack with all your adjustable positions. So you never really run out of variations, and you don't have to swap the movement entirely. That said, if you do want to mix things up a little bit, That'll bring me on to my next point, which is the fact that you should experiment with different rack pulls. Don't just do one style. You'll experience slower strength gains, more plateaus, and might develop weak links in the process. Plus, I would argue that for longevity, it's not the way to go. If you want to extend your strength training journey while getting way more athletic in the process, rotate the styles. For classical lifts, that'll be the snatch grip position, conventional, and sumo. For unconventional, it'll be trap bar behind the back Jefferson. But you can mix and match, whatever gives you carryover while following the rules that I talked about previously. In other words, if you're doing Jefferson deadlifts and you notice it'd be much more difficult than sumos, and you automatically raise them and you're not going excessive on the weights, the carryover will still be there. Remember that strength is strength. If you're an elite puller on any of the variations, you're going to be jacked, you're going to be athletic, and you should still be able to do very well on the pulling positions that you don't do. Like I would say that an 800-pound trap bar puller is going to be seriously strong as fuck. But it doesn't have to be that variation. It could be Jefferson. If you could do a 700-pound Jefferson deadlift, dude, that's really, really good. Same for behind the back. So I say rotate the variations, man. It'll allow you to pull for a much longer period of time and just ensure that general strength is on point. And some of these variations have their own unique benefits, which I've talked about so much in past videos, but that's what I advise, man. And then my final little bonus tip is instead of doing rack pulls, you can do it off blocks. Let's say you don't have the correct pin heights, or you're not allowed to do rack pulls in your gym, or you don't want to bend bars or anything, or you want something that's slightly more specific. Because when you pull from blocks, the way the bar flexes and all that, it's not exactly the same, right? Then just do it off blocks, man. Just make sure you have access to those. You get those cheap puzzle mats and use that for blocks, you know? You can even use aerobic steps, whatever your gym has. But remember, if you're going to be doing block pulls, ensure that the heights are correct. So I would say it shouldn't be higher than 4 inches in most cases. But again, depending on your height, for taller individuals, you might be in the 5 to 6 range. All goes back to what I talked about previously, how the height should not be too excessive, and the weight should not exceed 100 pounds more than what you could do from the ground. So as long as you're sticking to all these rules, and of course you're rotating the variations and all that, incorporating the speed pulls, should be fine. All there is to it, man. If you do rack pulls in the way that I described, you'll get much stronger and way bigger. Feel free to max out on them, do it for volume, have fun, and enjoy. Because your training is about to change in a major way.